Trench is at the back of my lot. It backs onto a farmer's field. That's where we have our trench. We built the trench just trying to further the living history part of our Great War troop. We decided to do one here locally so we could take part in living history in a trench. I'm interested in the Great War primarily because of my grandfather. I'm named after him. I inherited his military medal. My grandfather enlisted in the war in January 1916. He enlisted with 3 of his brothers. They were put into the 78th Winnipeg Grenadiers in March 1918. They saw a lot of action on the last 100 days. Battle of Amiens, August 8th, 1918. My grandfather was wounded. His first action is in the hospital until probably early October. Meanwhile, 2 of his brothers were killed while he was in the hospital. My grandfather was awarded the military medal for his actions at Battle at Valenciennes. That's roughly about November 8th, 1918. And I have no record of what his actions were, but it just said for actions at Valenciennes. He wouldn't tell anybody. He told everybody that he ran whiskey up to the officers. So I think my family connection there is why I've got that passion for it. I can't explain it any other way. Started the Great War Society with Dave Webb back in the 1990s. We were both pretty passionate about the Great War. We just started doing historical events, collecting uniforms, collecting equipment, help museums with grand openings of Great War displays. We take part in parades, remembrance ceremonies. We try to gravitate towards events that have some significance, that are meaningful and attached to the Great War. We actually helped fundraise for the Sir Arthur Currie statue in Strathroy, Ontario. We're quite proud of it. We got a Trillium grant. We purchased enough equipment for about 15 sets of gear so we could get younger guys involved in the hobby and in the group. We do rifle shoots. We've done march and shoots. It's grown from there. We've built the trench to correct dimensions, which the British trenches of the Great War were built to. It's a passion. You want to see it done right. I mean, we're quite concerned on getting the dimensions of everything correct. I've got wartime drawings on how to build duck boards, A-frames, how the corrugated tin's used. We don't want to fake anything up. We want to do it properly. We started off with one bay, started hand digging it. We soon found out that it's a lot of work. Modern people are not used to. We soon got an excavator involved. We're using equipment built to the same degree, duck boards, corrugated tin, A-frames to help support the walls. We've extended the trench out to 150 feet, 4 fire bays. We've got a communication trench leading up to it, and it's really taken on a life of its own. We also started trying to attract film projects to it. Got quite a bit of film activity going on right now. We've probably done close to 10 films. It's very accurate. It's probably the only trench in Ontario that I know about. So we're quite proud of it. We've had a couple 24-hour trenches, reliving the type of duties the soldiers had of the Great War. During the war, you'd be 3 days in the front line trench. During warmer weather, your stay could be longer. We try to make it as realistic as possible. The guys will go in usually mid-afternoon. They try to stay 24 hours. They'll follow orders. Guys will be on watch. You're still going to have one guy on sentry duty every other bay. We bring food up to them as if food would come during the war. Got to cook. You got to use latrine. So during the day, you'll find that there's a lot of sleeping going on. Everything's done at night because that's when all the work is done. You've got to repair the trench at night. Guys had to do sentry duty at night. We've had operations going out in the no man's land, checking the wire, that kind of thing. We had braziers going. Braziers are to keep you warm. So these guys started to really understand what it's like to stay alive, stay comfortable as you can in a trench. Some of the 24-hour trenches, we did okay. A couple, we had rain, almost snow. There was one night the trench had filled up with water and they were soaked. But they were cold. We didn't want hypothermia, and guys got to work on Monday mornings. And I give them credit. They stuck it out as long as they could. About 2 o'clock in the morning, they called it in. They couldn't take it, but they gave it a good effort. And I can't blame them. They called it quits. So they found out how tough it was. You got to give these guys credit that stayed out in those trenches in the Great War. Trenches are always needing repairs, and they always are falling apart. So you'll see during the Great War, trenches were needed maintenance all the time. The trench needed some work. Our group, you'll get 8 guys out there a good day, and so we needed the manpower. We've always wanted to be involved with the military. I approached the Elgin Regiment out of St. Thomas. They're combat engineers. Got in touch with Captain Hayes. I told them about the project. They got really interested in it. 2 weeks before, they had scouted out the property, and they came out and helped. They started arriving on a Friday. They brought in 2 7-ton engineering trucks. They brought in a 5-ton engineering truck. So those things are impressive. They were loaded with engineering equipment. I was talking to the officers and said, I could fix this up, that up, that. And they said, no, we want it as tough as possible. Well, this is a training exercise. So I left things as raw as I could. They bivouacked non-coms. They were in the barn. The NCOs and officers, they were in our stores room and our workshop. They set up a bivouac. So now we had guys go into the trench, and it's all got to be done by hand. We did start doing that in the existing trench. The Elgin Regiment are combat engineers, so they build bunkers, they build bridges. That's what they do. That they're diggers and builders. Anything engineering, the Elgin Regiment trains for and does. They carry about 50 or 60 guys. They're also in Waterloo, Ontario, so they've got 2 companies. I mean, we had quite a setup here. Our trench is modeled after a British trench, which the Canadians would have also used. It's got a lot of corrugated tin. That's the way the British did it. The first thing they did is they made all the major repairs to the existing trench with the heavy equipment. So they got to it. They knew what their projects were. They had organized it, so they had guys assigned to everything. So we had guys building A-frames. That was their job. They brought in more excavators and fix up a whole bunch of the trench walls that needed to be shored up. With the pressure of the earth and water, walls are always trying to push in. You've got sand always coming in. We're on quite a sandy soil here. So we've always got to work on it. The older NCOs, I believe, would have spent time in trenches. Some of them had been deployed overseas, so I think they would have been in bunkers and that type of thing. The militia guys that came in, a lot of them were university kids out of Waterloo area. I guess it was their first time ever digging a trench. I don't think they spent any time in the trench, so I think it was an eye-opener, and I think it was all fairly new to them. They were impressed at how sturdy the trench was once it's all revetted. It really impressed them. They all thought they could survive in this trench in a war, especially with the Ukraine war going on, and a lot of trenches are used there. In the Russian-Ukraine war right now, the artillery seems to be king, which was the case in the Great War. Guys are digging trenches, trying to get away from the effects of artillery. That's bringing them into trenches again. We built them to wartime standards, and they're quite narrow. But they were quite impressed with how it turned out. They got a charge out of, the type of technology, and they kept referring back, this is exactly how we would have dug it in the Great War. They really got a feel for how isolating a trench is. When you're in a trench, you don't know where you're at a lot because you don't have any visual references to the horizon. So you'll see these trench signs up all the time. And they got a feel for that it's very isolating when you can't see and you're deep into the soil. 30 engineers helped on the trench. In a matter of a day, they really progressed the trench and dug it deeper and strengthened the walls, the A-frames. And so that was a lot of manpower. They used it as a training session. They got a lot out of it because they did actual hands-on experience setting up combat positions. It worked out for both parties. We asked the Elgin Regiment to dig a second trench. It was to act as a German trench. The Germans, they used a lot of wicker, they used a lot of wood. So when we shoot a film, we're going to have a German trench that's going to have woods, revetment, things like that. Then myself and a couple of the NCOs, we mapped off where we wanted the German trench. So we used a type of cloth tape, very similar to what they had in the First World War, and we marked off the dimensions, what we wanted dug. So now that heavy equipment came away from the existing trench and went to the new trench. They brought in a backhoe and a bobcat. So they started digging the trench down to about 4.5 feet deep. They had to push the piles away from their trench, away from the hole, because you can't dig with the piles of dirt. We call it the spoils in the way. We had guys that were running parts back and forth. We had guys involved in the digging of the trenches. We had guys working on the equipment who were qualified operators, were given a chance to operate the heavy equipment. That was part of their goal, is to have people training on the equipment. So now when war happens, they got guys that are experienced on backhoes. And then what we did is we had the spoils brought back closer to make it look like a hand-dug trench.
Yeah, like right where that starts landing. A little more.
And then we dug the whole trench what we wanted, and that one was 3 bays. And what the Elgins dug in a couple hours. It would take a body of like 40 guys and most of a day. So they were here and built a second trench and put up a barbed wire entanglement. And so we've got a barbed wire entanglement between the 2 trenches. They assigned 3 guys to research barbed wire entanglements. They saw that it's very similar today to how it was done in the Great War. The barbed wire entanglement is to keep your opponent away from your trench. The rule of thumb that I've always known is you keep the barbed wire 1 hand grenade distance apart. So you can't sneak up and toss a hand grenade into the trench. First barbed wire entanglements are using wooden posts. Then they start to get more sophisticated. They're using angle iron, and then later on they're using pigtailed barbed wire picket stakes. And that would let them put these posts up silently in the middle of the night, make it stronger and keep the enemy out. Germans attacked at night, we attacked at night, British, French, everybody. Might go do a nighttime raid and try to take back prisoners. If you got to go through some barbed wire, you might have to cut it. That helps alert the sentries that are on duty. even to slow down a daytime advance. Anything to slow your opponent down is helpful. You get pretty sophisticated with your barbed wire entanglements. You can actually draw your opponent into a machine gun enfilade. If you look at some of the pictures in the last 100 days, especially of Great War, you'll see 40 yards of barbed wire, 50 yards of barbed wire. It is like, holy cow, it's pretty impregnable. We didn't build that. We don't have that kind of resources, but we built about a 4-strand barbed wire entanglement. They saw that it's very similar today how it was done in the Great War. Their job was to put up picket pins and picket posts. They were amazed. They were using real World War I picket stakes with corkscrews on them, and they saw how the old technology was, and they really gravitated towards it. They were pretty chumped about putting up 100-plus-year-old barbed wire picket pins. They got a lot out of it because they did actual hands-on experience setting up combat positions. Their soldiers learned a lot about what current trenches and barbed wire are like and compared to the Great War, and there was a lot of similarities. Why the Great War to me is relevant? I think a lot. It changed the rest of our world the way it is today. I think about the real sacrifice these guys did. Young guys went to war, fought. Some of them were married and were killed in the war. Their families were denied that father figure the rest of their lives. Some guys were horribly wounded. We tend to not even think about that. And that doesn't even touch the post-traumatic stress. How many guys were mentally hurt by the war? Our Army really shined. We should be immensely proud of the level of our Army at that point. You know, some of the guys were Brits that went back, but the Canadians, they could have sat at home, but it was something that they saw as their patriotic duty, and King and Empire and all that. We should be proud of what those guys did.
We raise this memorial to Canadian warriors. This is Canada's salute to her fallen sons. In that spirit, I unveil this memorial to Canada's dead.
My grandfather, proud man, he didn't talk much about the war. So I think it was an important time of his life. And 2 of his brothers he lost in that war. I can't imagine what he would say. He was a pretty quiet guy as it was. I think he'd get a charge out of it that somebody's taken an interest in a part of his life. And then I think he'd get a kick that I'm remembering him like that, and his brothers. I hope I'm doing it proud that you're keeping it going. You're keeping the Great War in front of people, and they can remember it and think about it, understand what those guys went through. We'd love to thank the Elgin Regiment for their help working on the trench, the expertise that they brought, the manpower that they brought, the equipment that they brought. It was an incredible event with them helping out. So the Elgins brought in a lot of manpower. They helped us maintain our trench, re-vet it, build it back up to an impressive standard, impressive level. We got a lot of work done. It was just a great experience. They were very professional. I'm impressed with the military, what they can do with engineering, combat engineering.